Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome. My name is John Hamry, and I want to say thank you all for coming. It's been a little hard to get here because President Biden is just down the block in front of, he's attending a funeral service for Ethel Kennedy, and so we've got a lot of people that are bottled up along the way, but they'll be coming. But thank you all for being here, and we're delighted to have you here. I want to say special thanks to Ambassador Kanahara, who's a dear friend, and he's now in a new capacity. He is heading up the Sasakawa Peace Foundation and working on really cutting-edge issues for Japan and the United States. It probably was maybe 5 or 6 months ago when we had a conversation that Ambassador Kanahara wanted to explore, all of the issues associated with extended deterrence. Now, this is a term of art. The bottom line is America wants to provide the nuclear deterrent for both of us. And this raises questions because there are a lot of things have happened over the last 5-6 years that have caused people to question, can we count on America? You guys pulled right out of Afghanistan without talking to us. There's things like that create doubt, in people's mind. And so we're exploring this together today. And I think it's an enormously important conversation for peace and stability in Asia. I firmly believe that extended deterrence is a foundational value for both of us. But I think we have to go through a very explicit process to prove that again to ourselves, that it is meaningful, it is important, and we need to put vitality back into it. And that's the conversation we're going to have today. So with your warm applause, would you please welcome Ambassador Kanahara to the stage, and he'll open this conference for real. Please, Ambassador.
Well, thank you, John. Thank you very much for all the CSIS people who organized this. It was my dream to have this long time. The Prime Minister Abe launched the debates on nuclear deterrence in Japan. He was assassinated, but somebody should pursue his way. And when the Abe government took power in 2012, China was our size. We didn't fear them. But meantime, China became as big as the United States, and the military budget is several times bigger than Japan's ones. And now we have to face truly the Taiwan contingency as a real contingency. Soviet Union was the formidable enemy for Japan, but NATO was there on the other side. We didn't fear them. China was on our side. Nuclear deterrence was perfect. And Russia, we are comfortable to facing Russia in the Far East. But China, NATO is simply irrelevant. And the Taiwan, Philippines, Japan would be frontal, but we have no common grounds or the secretariats or NATO-like organization in Asia. And so nuclear deterrence is now, for the first time, the real issue for us. How to defend Japan, how to defend Taiwan, how to defend the Philippines. Can we deter truly the Taiwan contingency vis-à-vis Xi Jinping's China? Now we have to discuss about this seriously. So thank you very much for having this opportunity, having this meeting, and thank you very much for all who worked hard for this realization. Thank you very much.
Okay. Yes. Oops. So shall we start? Okay. Good afternoon. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for coming to the session. In this session, we are going to discuss regional security environment in East Asia and how the U.S. and Japan should respond, especially from the perspective of extended deterrence. And first, let me introduce myself. My name is Keiko Iizuka, a senior political writer from Yomiuri Shimbun, Japanese newspaper. And for today's important topic, I am glad to welcome first Admiral Tomohisa Takei, the former Chief of Staff of Japan Maritime Self-Defense Force. He is now the Senior Fellow at the Sasakawa Peace Foundation. And then I would also like to welcome Mr. Sidney Silla, the Senior Advisor with the Korea Chair at the CSIS. Sid is former National Intelligence Officer for DPRK at the National Intelligence Council from 2020 to 2023, and is one of the US top experts on North Korea, as you may know. So now starting with Admiral Takei, please make presentation on the strategic environment in East Asia, focusing perhaps mostly on China, I presume. Yes, and perhaps the China and North Korea, both two countries' moves must be in some aspects interrelated to have a complex impact on the US-Japan response. So after the two presentations, I would like to go into Q&A session with the floor. So we have a short period of time, just 50 minutes. So let's start. Admiral Takei, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Izuka-san. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for having me. My presentation will be on the challenges of nuclear deterrence for Japan and the US alliance in the new strategic environment now we are facing in East Asia. To begin with, I'd like to review the challenges that have affected nuclear deterrence posture in East Asia in recent years. In 2021, a rapid increase in China's nuclear warheads was revealed in the annual report by US DoD. It is estimated that China will have approximately 1,500 nuclear warheads by 2035. If deployed nuclear warhead will be parity with the United States in number of the deployed, the state of instability paradox with China dominance in tactical nuke will emerge in East Asia. This is the first time in history. In 2022, there are the two events. First one, immediately after Russia's invade Ukraine, the credibility of U.S. extended deterrence provided for the U.S. alliance was shaken when President Putin's nuclear intimidation deterred American action and also NATO's action. And second was September this year, North Korea enacted the nuclear policy law, updating its nuclear doctrine. In 2023, two events. First one is a ChatGPT, which was released in November 2022, rapidly spread around the world. And in addition to conventional AI, the military use of generative AI became a real issue. AI technology will inevitably be incorporated into nuclear strategy and nuclear defense system. But the unlimited possibilities of generative AI could also turn into unknown risks. We should be careful. And second one is the Washington Declaration between US and South Korea marked the beginning of new phase of US ROK extended deterrence. Third, the role of conventional force in extended deterrence has been added to the agenda of US-Japan Extended Deterrence Dialogue, EDD in short. Japan 2022 National Security Strategy decided to introduce the counter-strike capabilities. In 2024, two events. First is North Korea and Russia signed Comprehensive Strategic Partnership Treaty in June 19 with Russia's cooperation. It became certain North Korea the development of nuclear weapons and intercontinental ballistic missile will accelerate. And second is that the war in Ukraine became a protracted war of the attrition, and the challenges for the Biden administration has how to end the war while preventing Russia from using nuclear weapons and escalating the situation into the Third World War. In other words, such challenges became a reality as nuclear deterrence to prevent the use of nuclear weapons in an ongoing war, and nuclear deterrence to end the war after deterrence had failed and the war had begun, that we see in the Ukraine. So I'd like to discuss two of the challenges from these. First challenge is regarding Japan's conventional capabilities. The discussion of conventional capability was added to the extended deterrence dialogue between Japan and the United States from June 28, 2023. The counter-strike capabilities that Japan will possess for the first time in the history, when organically integrated this capability with U.S. long-range conventional and nuclear capabilities, the merit of complementing the extended deterrence posture. In this case, if the command and control function of Japan and the United States are not fully coordinated, the effectiveness of deterrence will be reduced. So the two countries must steadily implement the upgrading of command and control function and strengthen the bilateral information analysis cell as well. This BIAC is the information exchange framework. On the other hand, there are some concerns inevitably accompany this escalation ladder arise. For Japan, the more conventional and nuclear capability are integrated, the more use of the weapons would be controlled by the United States. For the United States, there may be a feeling that Japan might deliberately use the weapons in order to draw the United States closer into the conflict. Japan and the United States must hold discussion aimed at the practical integration of Japan, the counter-strike capability into extended deterrence posture, and how to resolve the issues before deployment. Second challenge is the extended deterrence after a war has begun. Immediate after invasion of Ukraine, President Putin frequently mentioned the possibility of using nuclear weapons, which successfully deters NATO intervention because Russia was inferior to NATO in conventional force. There was concern in NATO that Russia might use escalate to de-escalate tactics to compensate for its conventional inferiority. Comparing the geographic characteristic between Europe and Asia, there are no constraints that would make China hesitate to use nuclear weapons, especially at maritime domain, where would be main battle zone of China, or where collateral damage would be reduced or limited in case of the war. In particular, the US and China deployed strategic nuclear force approach parity in near future. The stability-instability paradox will become a reality, and the effectiveness of E2ED tactics will increase while precluding US intervention. If the Taiwan contingency becomes protracted and spill over to Japan, the Japan-US alliance will face challenges against China's use of nuclear weapons. For example, how to deter China from using nuclear weapons while continuing to fight. If China attacks Japan territory with any form of nuclear weapons, will the US-Japan alliance counterattack with nuclear weapons or not? And so on. The nuclear balance in East Asia is tilting in favor of China every year. Unlike Europe, the situation will be more difficult to control escalation after war. To avoid the war is the most important strategic goal for US-Japan alliance. It is also necessary to prepare in advance for the worst case of scenario. This is because history has shown that leaders of the authoritarian countries often do not make decisions logically. I stop here.
Okay. Well, thank you, Admiral Take. This is, because you are Chief of Staff of Maritime Defense Force, I think it was very persuasive that China has become more and more threat, become bigger threat. Now let's move on to Sid. Sid, please, the floor is open. Thank you.
Well, thank you. I'd like to focus on North Korea, not surprisingly. We had a good laydown of the growing Chinese threat, and it's, for many of us, the North Korea threat has been there for a number of years, and it continues to be troubling. I think it'd be good to kind of lay out where we are kind of on the eve of a presidential election in the United States, a change of administrations here, reconsideration of Korea policy and our approach of everything. It's really good to right size what we have with the North Korea threat today. I'd like to divide it between looking at capabilities and then looking at intent to the greatest degree that we can reasonably expect to have understanding on intent. On the capability side, at a certain level, there's been surprising and maybe even shocking advances in the North Korea program over the past year or so. I think a lot of that is involved in the choreography and really doesn't reflect an exponential growth in the program, qualitatively or quantitatively. We've been watching this program for years. This is not to diminish the threat posed by the program, but rather to kind of examine what we understand about the capabilities and how we posture in response. We've watched North Korea move from plutonium to highly enriched uranium to attempt a thermonuclear device. All of this would be what you would expect from a country that had committed to having a full nuclear capability. We saw improvements in the delivery systems, moving from liquid centric to solid centric, giving more reliability to missiles, and not only reliability in their performance, but ease in handling, ability to launch rapidly in response to perceived threats. We've seen North Korea developing a whole array of weapons from even multiple rocket launcher-like rockets to short-range ballistic missiles, medium, intermediate, intercontinental, air-launched cruise missiles. Again, everything that you would expect from a country that was trying to develop a full-fledged nuclear force. Now, Kim Jong-un has himself hinted a few days ago that much work remains to be a full nuclear power. This kind of is why it's one is pessimistic in terms of the possibilities that maybe Kim Jong-un would be more responsive to discussions about giving up part of his force, etc. For now, he's expanding his capabilities. The capabilities that we've seen, particularly since Kim Jong-un's failure in Hanoi to lock in his nuclear status while getting concessions from the United States, a focus on holding Seoul at risk. Beginning with the shorter range ballistic missiles we saw being launched in 2019 all the way up to today, and then the accompanying rhetoric that has North Korea now declaring the Republic of Korea as a hostile enemy with whom we're not interested in talking, not interested in negotiating, not interested in reunifying at some point, but whom we need to clarify boundaries with so we can make it clear to them that, well, our intent is to leave you alone. If you touch a single inch of us, if you transgress our country, we will have every capability to subjugate and dominate you. And this is interesting because the rhetoric was almost exactly along the lines of what we've been saying as North Korea followers, experts, analysts for years, was that the intent of North Korea's program, at bottom line intent, was not so much a defensive capability, but a desire to get a capability that would allow it to dominate the Korea Peninsula and restore a balance of power favorable to Pyongyang, similar to that which was essentially eroded with the end of the Cold War. And then finally, in addition to obviously holding at risk, subjugating and dominating South Korea, having sufficient demonstrated capabilities to deter both the United States and Japan, so that in a contingency on the peninsula, likely some type of hostility launched by the North, that Japan and the United States would somehow be decoupled or would not be there committed to the defense of the peninsula. For now, there's uncertainties about how much of what North Korea has claimed, again, both qualitatively and quantitatively, are true. What would the exact performance of the reentry vehicle be? How good would this hypersonic glide vehicle? Is it realistic? What about these suicide drone threats? There's a lot of North Korea packages the advances in this program for maximum deterrent effect, right? And so we know that there's a degree of exaggeration, but we also know that these missiles do perform, at least to some degree, in the test phase. The missiles now that are being exported and being used on the battlefield in Ukraine show some problems, but these are all areas, I think, in particular, with Russian help that North Korea can do to kind of cross the T's and dot the I's, as it were, in terms of developing these capabilities. So the question then becomes, what is North Korea's intent? And that's the intent issue is always difficult. If I had any type of precision in estimating and predicting intent, I'd probably be up in New York working at the stock exchange. But we can tell from North Korea's behavior over the years a few things. First of all, again, what I mentioned earlier was this program from the very beginning was not defensive in nature, was not built in the face of an existential threat to North Korea, other than the threat posed to the North system, to the regime, that at the end of the Cold War, as we saw country by country collapse, and we saw Pyongyang's commentary on why they collapsed. They lacked a strong military, they lacked strong ideology, they lacked a strong socialism, but he watched these countries collapse, and it expedited the urgency of getting a capability that the North had been thinking about, frankly, for decades. This is an important fact, and of course the fact that they took them 30 years to get where they are today showed that there wasn't an urgent, imminent threat that they faced when they began to pursue this capability. This is important in looking at capabilities going forward. When you look at the size of the arsenal, it far exceeds that which would otherwise be necessary if only self-defense was their objective. Second, at the risk of being redundant, not only the U.S. is the focus, not only the U.S. is the target, but the ROC is the focus. I think this is important because I remember going through, working this from the very beginning of the issue, where at the very beginning it was, surely North Korea can't do this. They'll be lucky to be able to reprocess uranium spent fuel rods to produce plutonium. They'll be lucky to get centrifuges to work. And at the end of the day, they're just developing this capability to sell it off and to get the United States' attention. And of course, they got our attention, and they got many meetings with us. And every meeting we had ended up in failure because at the end of the day, North Korea didn't want a better relationship with the United States. They wanted nuclear weapons, and they since have stated so repeatedly. And so, that gives us an idea of what future scenarios we can face. I think, if I'm asked, is North Korea deterred today, I jokingly tell people, as a policymaker, I would say unequivocally, yes, North Korea is deterred. As an analyst, I would say, I don't know. Because at the end of the day, we're talking about causality. Why has North Korea not done something with their program until today? Is it because of our strong deterrent? Yes, probably to some degree. Is it because Kim might see the timing isn't yet ripe? That's possible as well. Deterrence requires vigilance in terms of our constant assessments of the threat posed by the program and demonstration of our capabilities to make sure that they know that no matter how big their arsenal gets, no matter how good it is, that they will always be deterred. Going forward, And that's because of our commitment, the United States commitment to the defense of Japan, the United States commitment to the Republic of Korea, and the extended deterrence commitment, which is central to both of those. So going forward, I think this is an ongoing homework assignment. We need to think of scenarios of use. Last year, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence declassified key judgments in a graphic from a national intelligence estimate that looked at North Korea nuclear use scenarios going to 2030. If you haven't seen it, it's a great document to look at. Doesn't go too in depth, but it gives you an idea of the types of scenarios where, short of reunification by force, which everyone thinks is really a low priority given the state of the North Korean force, they can, unlikely that reunification along the lines of, June 25th, 1950 is in their plan. But there are other strategic objectives that North Korea could achieve, maybe not through the direct use of nuclear forces, but building upon that stability-instability paradox, showing more adventurous, more risk-tolerant actions in the conventional domain that, as we're seeing recently with the drones, can flare up rather quickly and bring everybody to a real sense of concern about the situation. So going forward, continued dialogue about the threat, capabilities, and intent will be a central part of U.S.-Japan, U.S.-ROK, of course, planning to help counter this threat.
You'll stop here?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. This has been very high-level expert presentation, and thank you so much.
Thank you.
Very educational. And so everyone, so let's go for a Q&A session. And if I be as an icebreaker, perhaps I will ask first question. But after this, please ask questions. It's a great opportunity to ask questions. And since both of your presentations were really high level and very sort of a difficult professional talks, I just would like to ask a very beginner question. Why this discussion of extended deterrence has become so lively in Japan, especially on the side of Japan, maybe in just this year or last year, these couple of years. Why is that?
Yes. The reason why the Sasakawa Peace Foundation, the members come here is to discuss some extended deterrence issues here in the United States.
Yes.
And I think there are several factors or the events. And the first one, between Japan and the United States, extended deterrence dialogue, EDD, has been continued since 2010, twice a year, and the two countries reaffirm the credibility of extended deterrence.
That was between the United States
US
and
and Japan,
Japanese government.
US-Japan government.
Okay.
However, the biggest change, I think, it was the Ukraine war. When Russia used nuclear weapons for the intimidation in the Ukraine war, there grew the bigger concern in the Japanese strategic community about the extended deterrence credibility provided by the United States. That is the first one. Second one is just after the beginning of Ukraine war, former Prime Minister Abe said, we need to break taboos and discuss what keeps world peace. I think my understanding, he had in mind 2 points. One is to discuss NATO nuclear sharing, NATO type nuclear sharing to introduce in Japan. And second is to revise necessity to revise 3 non-nuclear principles in this timing. We need to discuss such matters. And maybe there is a third. The US and South Korea have the extended deterrence dialogue, similar one, since 2010. But there are the 5 years the stopped that discussion between two governments. It is President Moon Jae-in administration. Just after the President Yoon Suk-yeol administration, the South Korea strongly lead the U.S.-Japan extended deterrence dialogue and conclude the Washington Declaration, and they realize the stronger the extended deterrence posture between two countries. For example, the U.S. SSBN regular protocol on South Korea port, it is visible or the tangible extended deterrence posture provided by the United States, or the regular tabletop exercise between military, between the government officials. I think it is maybe deepen the two countries' understanding or the credibility of extended deterrence. However, when we look ourselves, so the much discussion in Japan, the strategic community, is focusing on pros and cons of NATO-type extended deterrence, nuclear sharing in Japan. And Prime Minister Kishida said the nuclear sharing should be discussed, but neither bringing nuclear weapons into Japanese territory during the peacetime, nor the operation of nuclear weapons by the self-defense force in an emergency is allowed. The discussion stopped here. That is, I think that is enough, because, as I mentioned, the current strategic environment in East Asia does not wait us to discuss these matters seriously. By 2027, President Xi Jinping ordered the military leaders ready to invade Taiwan in 2027. We have only several years remained. At that time, China might use nuclear weapons, even in the intimidation, to prevent United States and Japan from intervening in the Taiwan Strait. At that time, if we are not ready to respond to such a nuclear intimidation from China, I think it harms the national interest of Japan, and as a result, the world will emerge. That is not good enough, not favorable for U.S.-Japan alliance in this area. We should avoid such a situation, and we should continue this extended deterrence dialogue more seriously. Like the government decided to upgrade the discussion to the minister level.
I see. Yes, two governments just have raised the level of discussion to ministerial. But I wonder, I'm a bit concerned that, not only these ministerial dialogues might become too formal, maybe the more serious, the ground level discussions are still necessary, right?
Yes, and still the discussion about the nuclear issues, it could be taboo.
In Japan.
In Japan, so that maybe the government, there is the EDD, extended dialogue between two governments, but it is quite difficult to discuss openly about this extended deterrence or the nuclear issues. So the reason why we should discuss this matter in second track or 1.5 tracks seriously about these matters.
Okay. So sort of, both of us are from Japan. So we are behind South Korea. Is that what you're saying? In terms of discussion, of serious discussion about nuclear.
Yes, and I heard there was discussion among three leaders, South Korea, United States, Japan, whether the Japan is included to the bilateral deterrence dialogue, Washington Declaration posture. But newspaper said I think it is right or bad, and that right or wrong, but Prime Minister Kishida hesitated to enter the dialogue. And the other paper said quite different matters. The South Korean president declined Japan entering the Washington Declaration. However, Japan and South Korea share threat from North Korea and China as well. There is a much earlier to government and three governments discuss the distant issues cooperatively. And I think one of the options for Japanese government is to enter Washington Declaration posture in the future. And for example, share the conventional support for U.S. strategic asset visit the South Korea, that is, or the information sharing among three, it is possible in the future.
Okay, thank you. Wow, we have a lot to work, right?
Yes, yes.
Okay, thank you. And Sid, I would really like to ask you about the role of Russia in North Korean, in building up or assisting North Korean nuclear arsenal. How is it working?
Well, let me take this from maybe the 30,000-foot level, the strategic view, and then work into like specific questions as to what nuts and bolts are being imported for use with what missile or not.
Okay.
If you haven't read it, Secretary of State Anthony Blinken's Peace and Foreign Affairs a few days ago really laid out the threat that the United States faces from these revisionist powers. I really like the fact that he used that revisionist term because that's what we had integrated into the NIE to describe a North Korea that might be willing to use force for limited objectives to overturn the status quo on the peninsula, drive the U.S. out of there and establish its position of dominance. And Secretary Blinken defines them as very helpful. First of all, there's a small number. He focuses on Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea. Actors that are determined to alter the foundational principles of the international system and entrench their autocratic rule at home and resolve territorial disputes by coercion or force. This is the international order that North Korea has longed for. The international order where they would be accepted for who they are, a non-denuclearizing, coercive, international norms ignoring nation state. And a large part of our strategy, even when it became increasingly clear that denuclearization was going to be impossible or very difficult to achieve through negotiations, was to maintain pressure and maintain isolation, to stigmatize their nuclear status, which would act as a deterrent to other potential nuclear aspirants and would help us to at least impede the growth of the program, even if not perfectly halt it, or get Kim to change his attitude. The lifeline is thrown to him by Vladimir Putin. Here's the world that you've been looking for. We're willing to take you as you are. You're a nuclear power. We don't understand why the U.S. doesn't get it and move on. You help us, we help you. We have this immediate need, munitions to execute the war in Ukraine. We have some ways we can help you. And it really emboldens Kim. It emboldens, for now, at the very least, he can have some degree of confidence that he's got a relatively reliable, it is Russia after a while. I wouldn't know if I would pin my future on aid coming in from Russia, but at least a near-term survival strategy and pressure relief mechanism and ways to improve his munitions, the production factories, help him with air, naval, ground type systems, of course, space, satellite, nuclear warhead. We don't have a lot of details on that, and it's been helpful in terms of what the U.S. government has released already. But at the very least, we know that Kim's going to enjoy improvements across his arsenal in the conventional and WMD side, and he will be emboldened. And my hope is that in terms of, if you look at, in fact, one of the drivers we put in the NIE that talked about factors that, if fulfilled, Kim might feel emboldened or powerful, and that would be a sense of confidence that he would have Beijing and or Moscow's approval. China, to its credit so far, has not been so openly associating with North Korea. They still have a degree of concern over reputational risk, perhaps. But Russia looks all in with North Korea, and North Korea looks all in with Russia, and that's troubling going forward, both in terms of capabilities and intent.
So it's that serious that Russia is actually helping military technology. That is actually strengthening North Korea's nuclear arsenal. Then
what's interesting, and I was ruminating about this the other day. Having been in Korea in 1989 and 1993 when this issue first broke. And I remember the concerns we had. We were enjoying the benefits of watching the Cold War structure collapse and Republic of Korea normalizing relations with former enemies. And then, at that time, North Korea's world was turned upside down. It had no more friends, per se. It gets hit with some heavy floods in '84, some bad weather. Every year, it's either 2 days without rain, they got a drought, 2 days with rain, they're flooding. But it's from that point onward where we also saw a deterioration, I think, in the readiness on the conventional side, because they just had no capabilities to upgrade their weapon systems, train at the levels they wanted to, even feed and clothe their soldiers became increasingly difficult. And this was the environment in which the nuclear program advanced. And so there was and that could explain that, along with the fallacy, the myth that North Korea pursued nuclear weapons because they wanted a way to talk to the United States. It led to a lot of people to be in denial in the 1990s, in the 2000s, about the threat posed by the nuclear program. And now what we have, not only do we have a nuclear North Korea, and a nuclear Korea that seems to have missiles that work to some degree of reliability. If we have that plus a recovery or enhancement of conventional forces, readiness, or capabilities because of Russian interests, it opens up options for Kim and more options to cause trouble. And that's why I think the strategic concerns also have of the improvement of relations between Russia and North Korea have current real-time ramifications today.
I presume that China is not too happy about this current situation then.
I don't know. China's not happy about it, but they don't appear yet motivated to try to do something to stop it or reverse it. Part of this, we know that at the end of the day, China continues to help Russia with their war effort in Ukraine.
Right.
They're probably scrambling to figure out ways to prevent their worst nightmare, which is a Russia-emboldened Kim Jong-un launching some type of conflict that sparks grave instability in Northeast Asia outside of China's control. I think that's their concern, and they're probably scrambling at ways to work either with Pyongyang or with Moscow to try to ensure that doesn't happen.
I see. Do you have any idea which technology is most critical to help boost North Korean nuclear arsenal from Russia?
I mean, I've seen the speculation. I've seen, and it's probably informed speculation. The idea, that they had some problems with early launches of their satellites, so that the Russians probably helped them. That's why the third attempt succeeded, or that they're providing help with the reentry vehicle, because that seems to be the one area where North Korea hasn't claimed complete success. Maybe providing help with jamming, cyber. GPS systems. There's a lot of areas where Russia can help North Korea, even without getting to the advanced state-of-the-art technologies, where they could just simply fill in some of the areas where, again, I worry as much about the conventional capabilities as the WMD. Of course, their missiles will be better and their nuclear warheads would be better. But if we actually have a real viable fighting Korean People's Army force, again, that idea of a limited objective, conventional centric, risking elevation to the nuclear threshold type of North Korea adventurism is the thing that most concerns me.
I see. So it shows how Russia is grateful to North Korea, by helping Russia aiding the ammunitions and maybe the soldiers sending to
Sure.
Ukraine. So it's all related.
They're part of the team. I was reluctant to ascribe to Vladimir Putin some desire to use North Korea to kind of goad them into some type of behavior that would distract the United States, or that any pain and suffering diplomatically that Washington encounters is good for Moscow. But increasingly, the relationship is growing in its dangerous dimensions, and with the reports of North Koreans possibly even going to participate in the war in Ukraine, we can see, firsthand the degree of cooperation that is ongoing between Russia and North Korea.
I see. Well, as a moderator, I'll stop asking questions. And please raise your hand if you have any questions, both to experts. Oh, yes, please.
Hello, my name is Ujjwal, and I'm a private citizen. And the question that I have to ask is, we know that authoritarian regimes value stability and continuity of their regime above all else to preserve their grip on power. So how can we use potentially counter threats to their threats that are credible such that we don't act on it, but can convince them that it's not worth it, it's worth it to back down rather than lose everything that they've built over generations?
中国ですね。I think that's for you. 中国にこれをやっても意味がないですよと分からせるためにはどうしたらいいですかということだと思います。
Yeah, very hard question, hard to answer. But the threat or coercion posed by China is real, and we should take some approach, realistic one. And number one is strengthen our current defense capability to meet the challenge posed by China. That is the first one. The second one is strengthen U.S.-Japan alliance, more integrated one, to be able to operate multi-domain operation. It could be the China's use of the multi-domain. And third one is we mean the like-minded country in this area more cooperate. We cooperate like the Biden administration. They proceed the lattice work framework to connect the multilateral multi-country based on hub and spoke relationship, adding to that AUKUS or the Quad or trilateral relationship, South Korea, Japan, US, Japan, Philippines. That total effort will make China hesitate to change status quo in the East Asia. But the situation is getting worse for us because China is increasing the nuclear warhead steadily. And as I mentioned, China would have 1,500 warheads by 2035. We should understand the situation is getting worse. We mean the U.S.-Japan alliance should strengthen the relationship, also expand our partnership to the whole East Asia to be able to meet China's challenges.
Can I comment?
Yes, please.
So, it's almost, there's a lot of similarities between the China issue and the North Korea issue in that both countries are assessed by the United States and others to have nefarious attitudes and to be developing capabilities that require us to respond. And then our response thereafter appears to generate responses by China and or North Korea respectively that give an impression of the U.S. pressure and containment and encirclement strategy of leaving Beijing, separately Pyongyang, no choice but to further arm itself. Add on to that the accusation that leaders like Xi Jinping and Kim Jong-un actually like to have external enemies that help them justify their control and at home, their authoritarian control measures at home. And so that we're playing in their arm by acting as the provocateurs. But for me, having been involved with the Obama administration and having watched, and its efforts to try to really find areas to cooperate with and not always compete with and conflict with China, a good faith effort that tested Beijing. We had something similar in Korea with a solid 5 years of President Moon Jae-in making every attempt to try to seek some type of reconciliation and peace establishment that would endure, and Kim Jong-un absolutely rejecting his overtures. Not a failure of the Moon administration's policy per se, but a failure of Kim Jong-un to take the opportunity to go down a different path. So your question ultimately is, what can we do to try to interact with countries that behave like this? Yes, the regimes desire stability, but they also know how to use unpredictability. They also know how to use brinksmanship in a way that causes us to double guess the actions we take as they continue to build their forces up.
Yes. Related to that, there was a talk, the top summit talk between U.S. and North Korea, between Trump and
Yes.
Kim Jong-un. And how do you predict from now on, the U.S. attitude toward North Korea? I understand it depends on which will win.
Sure. If you maybe rephrase the question, if elected, would Donald Trump try to pick up from Hanoi?
Yes, that's my question.
And like I haven't answered that question 50 times over the past week. But no, it's a great question, and it's worth really serious consideration because you really have to peel back your prejudices about the actors and players involved. And look at what Singapore and Hanoi attempted to do and what it resulted with. It was an attempt by North Korea to lock in its nuclear status and achieve sanctions relief in exchange for trading off a 5-megawatt reactor that it's probably hoping to decommission any day. And wouldn't that be beautiful if the U.S. paid the cost of decommissioning that? But at the end of the day, Kim Jong-un walked away because he wasn't willing to meet us halfway or wasn't willing to really enter into a serious discussion with Donald Trump at that time. And so, 5 years have passed. And, I think both leaders, in terms of their public statements, North Korea appears almost to regret the fact that they ever listened to the Moon administration, that they ever listened to South Korean efforts to try to act as a intermediary, as a mediator, and that they wasted time. They could have been so much more far advanced if they weren't led down this road by President Moon. So that is an expression of we're not going to make that mistake again with, President Moon number 2, whoever it might be, or with the return of Donald Trump. So North Korea may or may not be real interested in exploring a return to that time period. And President Trump himself has had time to think about what happened there, and he now knows what people were telling him at the time, which was Kim Jong-un was not interested in seriously putting his program on the table, and today, 5 years later, it's even less likely that he would be.
So this extended deterrence would function without both sides, not communicating each other or maybe not negotiating each other at all. That would be the reality?
It's interesting. We have tried so many ways to talk to North Korea. Most recently, my former boss, Joe Detrani, published his memoirs where he talked about the secret trips we made into Pyongyang during the Obama administration to attempt to work through these difficult issues and, just total disinterest in going down that path. The fundamental problem when you look at the history of this issue is the biggest incentive that we can provide North Korea, obviously, is normalization.
Right.
Who wouldn't want to be a friend of the United States at the end of the day, right? Well, I got somebody who's not that into us, and it's Kim Jong-un. And, again, so that's a challenge we will face, we do need to look at ways we can reduce tension on the peninsula, and advance our Japanese friends' objectives of making progress on the abductee issue and other bilateral DPRK Japan issues. So I think, first of all, let's be clear, the Biden administration has made great efforts to try to engage North Korea. Repeated overtures that they've rejected. It's North Korea that has been the one refusing to come to the table. And I know our government of Japan friends are always frustrated every time it looks like there might be an opportunity to do something that North Korea walks away from that as well. But it has never stopped a leader, either in Washington or Tokyo, from trying. And I imagine that will mark whoever gets elected this November. If North Korea raises its hand, picks up the phone, calls that 202-647 number for a state, we're down at the Beijing embassy the next day picking up visas. It's the way it works.
Wow. Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Okay, please.
Thank you very much for this amazing conversation. I'm Chelsea Wiley from the International Institute for Strategic Studies, and I wanted to ask a question about if we see another Trump administration. There's a conversation going on amongst Republicans about nuclear sharing with Rock and basing a U.S. nuclear weapon on their soil. And I wanted to ask, we're likely to see more provocative actions by DPRK and PRC if this is the case. And in the case of Japan, will Japan have to rack with this question as well and consider nuclear basing on their soil? Or will it become more of a counter-strike conversation and increasing those capabilities? Thanks very much.
Okay, great question. So maybe you go for the South Korea.
I mean, there's so many potential scenarios
Right.
In terms of if President Trump comes back and elected. There's a number of scenarios too if Vice President Harris is elected. But with Donald Trump, the things people speculate, like a deal with North Korea where they agree to not deploy ICBMs and threaten the U.S. The U.S. then pulls its troops off the peninsula and either gives a thumbs up or a blinking eye to South Korea in terms of its aspirations to develop its own nuclear program, or the idea that we would try to save costs by pulling out troops but putting in nukes. It's all speculative at this point, but I think what will happen is that there'll be some development, whether it's a classic missile launch nuclear test, provocation, or some other lethal kinetic thing that heats up and gets people really concerned about the peninsula. There's going to be the extended deterrence confidence in South Korea is likely to need some attention. And the calls for, like what you mentioned, either returning tactical nukes or again, internally. I think CSIS has done some good work on this. Victor directed his team to do some research. Actual opinions among the security and government elite are much less favorable towards pushing for nuclear weapons on the soil than these generic polls that usually yield about 80% support for that. So we'll just have to see. It's really hard, but I'm interested from the Japan angle.
Yeah.
Okay, Admiral.
So I think that we need to break taboos and discuss what keeps world peace. This is most important, to discuss everything without taboo. However, this year Nobel Committee decided to award Nobel Peace Prize to the Nihon Hidankyo, which the Japanese government should receive such a message from the Nobel Committee very seriously. And as you know, Japanese government stands to the nuclear nuclear disarmament is to persistently promote realistic and practical effort in a manner that firmly involve nuclear power. This is no change. So in case something big change, Japanese government should change their mind to possess nuclear weapons or to allow the United States to bring the nuclear weapons in Japanese territory. But I have no idea this matter still yet. But we need to discuss what is necessary to deter some current potential antagonists to change status quo in East Asia.
Yeah, I mean, I can't emphasize that part enough. We called it on the Korean side raising the nuclear IQ. And it kind of applies to the broader issue of our nuclear, how nuclear weapons are employed, what happens in terms of the selection process, and et cetera. But also to be able to have more people fluent in the answer to the question, why don't we just reintroduce tactical nuclear weapons on the peninsula? Isn't that really the only way to get Kim's attention? The answer to that is no. But how many people can really articulate that? So that's why these continued kind of guttural reactions, we need nukes. North Americans aren't going to be there for us. Look at Ukraine. Well, forgetting that Ukraine was not a treaty ally covered by our extended deterrent. Doesn't matter. Look, the Americans didn't help the Ukrainians; they're not going to help us. Mm-hmm. How do we correct that? This is like the job and responsibility, in particular, of the people gathered here for this conference, the people who write and live and breathe national security, extended deterrence, to continue to put that message out there that explains, that addresses the question: how do we deter China? How do we deter North Korea? What works? What doesn't?
Yes. I think time is running out, so this would be the last question. Any other question from the floor? Oh, okay. Yes, please.
Thank you for your insightful discussion. This is Ken Harada from GG Press Japan. So you talking about the possibility of trilateral dialogue on extended deterrence. So if trilateral cooperation on extended deterrence gets realized, what kind of impacts or implications or discussions do you expect or we are going to see from that efforts? And also another one is on China, and you are talking about the Chinese rapid buildup of the nuclear arsenal, but China has denied the discussion with the United States on nuclear disarmament. Is there anything specific thing that for Japan or South Korea can do to bring China to the table of this discussion with United States? Thank you.
I see. Thank you. So maybe the possibility of trilateral talks, and then.
Yes.
Do you want to do trilateral?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Yes,
please.
I need. Yeah. Anyway, the United States provides us the extended deterrence. It is the kind of, for my understanding, not stronger than that of the South Korea and the United States, because there is no operational discussion how to use tactical nuclear weapons. Also, there is no tabletop exercise between two governments involving the Congress, the policymakers. There is no discussion in Japan, and South Korea enjoy regular protocol of SSBN. It is tangible, the credibility provided by the United States of extended deterrence. When Japan participates in the Washington Declaration, Japan can cooperate in the South Korea to support the U.S. strategic asset, the deployment to South Korea. For example, on the way, for example, SSBN protocol to South Korea, any SSN or SSBN should pass through Japanese territorial water, or the very vicinity of Japanese territorial water. At that time, Japan can provide support for strategic asset on the way to the South Korea. Also, we provide information. We gather the South Korea and United States as well. Most importantly, such a discussion could lead not only for the extended nuclear issues, but also the conventional issues. When something happens in the Korean Peninsula, Japan will provide logistic support based on the United Nations force so far, but it is enacted June 1946. It is 1 month before Japan's self-defense force established. Very old. But in case of the war in Korean Peninsula, there is no way Japanese government or self-defense force can support operation of South Korea or the United States. So such a trilateral discussion could lead such a conventional sphere for the future cooperation among two countries.
On the latter question, I don't know that there's much hope that there could be a forum in which China would be willing to consider limitations on its nuclear program. They appear to be, moving at a pace seeking to achieve at least parity with the United States. Their logic would be kind of similar to the North Korea logic. Why should we alone put limits on our capabilities? Right. So I think, that would be very hard. I think, frankly, at the end of the day, China, China lacks the ideological commitment to denuclearization. I think that marked the P5 countries, right? Even throwing Russia in there. Although Russia's recent tolerance of North Korea's nuclear status brings that into question. I remember listening to a Chinese counterpart at one time saying, listen, we have nuclear neighbors all around us, to the north, to the south, to the, China, Russia, India, Pakistan. What's one more nuclear power? And so, I just don't think they'd be responsive to that type of outreach.
Okay, thank you. Well, unfortunately, we are close to the end of our time. So, but this has been very stimulating, very interesting discussion. Thank you so much for a great presentation. So please join me in thanking both distinguished speakers. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so here we are. So thanks for being here. This is our second panel. It really follows through quite nicely from where the first panel ended, because we're talking today here in this panel about the future of extended deterrence. I'm Franklin Miller. I'm a non-resident senior associate at the CSIS. We have Elaine Bunn, a non-resident senior associate at CSIS, and of course Ambassador Kanahara, who you've already met, who is directing the Sasakawa Peace Foundation. So we're going to have presentations first from Elaine, and then Kanahara-san, and then we'll go to your questions.
Thank you, Frank. So our panel was asked to discuss the future of extended deterrence in light of what the last panel talked to us about with regard to the changing security environment and the threats we're facing. And my answer to that would be the future is one of evolution. Because basically alliances have to evolve to deal with the threats. As they change, the times, domestic politics, they have to evolve, because guess what happens if they don't? Who here remembers CETO or CENTO? Those were alliances we once had, and they atrophied and died. They didn't evolve. And then you've got NATO that has evolved, it's reinvented itself several times, I would say, and it's as strong as it's ever been. So the US-Japan alliance has evolved. It has been in this process for a while, and it's going to continue to evolve to strengthen deterrence. Now, okay, when I say strengthen deterrence, let me remind you that not all deterrence is extended deterrence, and not all extended deterrence is extended nuclear deterrence. Nuclear use is unlikely to come out of nowhere. It's unlikely to come, just out of the blue. Much more likely to come out of conventional crisis and conflict. And so Japan already does contribute to deterrence more broadly, and will likely do even more in the future. So when I talk about, the division of labor in alliances, I like to think of it as, okay, there's what a country does for itself, what it does, there's what we do together, and then there's what the US does for the alliance. Uniquely, in our case, it's the nuclear weapons capability that we bring. So when I talk about the Japanese, contributing to deterrence, they do a lot of things for themselves. I have watched as Japanese scrambles its own fighters to when Chinese and Russian planes enter their airspace. They've been doing that for a long time, and they've evolved even more, as we heard in the first panel. The latest Japanese national security strategy steps up Japan's defense spending. It embraces counter-strike capabilities. Another category that's been changing and will continue to change is Japanese intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, ISR, and their space capabilities. So, Japan is investing seriously in a lot of these areas. Then when you think about what the US and Japan do together for the alliance, the example I think of first is what we do in missile defense in and around Japan, with US and Japanese interceptors and sensors sharing information between US and Japanese sensors. Then when we talk about extended deterrence, as I say, that's more than just the nuclear part. Sometimes we forget that. It's more than the nuclear part. I would say that there's no greater sign of US commitment to extended deterrence than the 50,000 plus forces that we have deployed in Japan, and their families, and then we have forward deployable conventional forces, and both conventional and nuclear, that you can bring to the region. And again, as I say, as for what the US does exclusively for the alliance, that has been, and I hope continues to be, the nuclear deterrence part. So, we've made these explicit extended nuclear deterrence guarantees to just a small set of countries. I mean, it's the NATO countries, which does get bigger, but is now 32, but then Japan, South Korea, Australia. those are the ones I put at very explicit nuclear, extended nuclear deterrence guarantees. I do think that in so doing, what does that mean? We have both privately and publicly affirmed that aggression against that set of countries, including Japan, could, under some circumstances, merit a U.S. nuclear response. And so should Japan believe that commitment? So we've got these treaty obligations that go back decades, almost 70 years. But then there are all these things that have happened subsequently. It's subsequent practice in international law. It is all the consultations, and that can be at the summit level, the ministerial level, the EDD level, the military to military. It's all those consultations over a whole lot of years where we make statements like what President Biden said in the 2024 summit with the Prime Minister, where he reiterated the unwavering commitment of the U.S. to the defense of Japan under Article 5 of the treaty, using its full range of capabilities, including nuclear capabilities. And so it's not a one and done. It's not that there's a treaty or there's one statement. It's this whole it's years of these subsequent statements, exercises together, discussions and consultations. There was a time when it was hard to find anyone in the government of Japan with whom to talk nuclear deterrence issues. Arms control, that was pretty easy to have those discussions, but it was really difficult to have the deterrence discussions. And I would say that now the government of Japan and many of the outside experts in think tanks and so forth, universities, those are some of the most nuanced and sophisticated discussions about nuclear deterrence, nuclear strategy, and that sort of thing. We've had this extended deterrence dialogue that's gone on since 2010, but this ministerial in July was the first time that they had a separate meeting at the Minister of Defense, Minister of Foreign Affairs level about extended deterrence. And that's extended nuclear deterrence, extended deterrence writ large, and what does Japan bring to deterrence in the region? Yes, Japan is going to have counterstrike capability, and when allies have the capability to reach out and touch an adversary on their own, a nuclear armed adversary, it does elevate the need for conventional planning together, I think, where there's really transparent planning on that conventional side about what's Japan going to do, what's the U.S. going to do, and also because it affects an adversary's calculation also about nuclear use, which definitely has implications for that, for us. So in any event, I think it was very significant that the ministerial in July emphasized two things that have been ongoing for a while, that Japan is going to set up this Japan Self-Defense Forces Joint Operational Command as of 2025, and also that the U.S. is going to be transitioning U.S. Forces Japan, which is currently really mainly an administrative unit that looks at what's going on in American bases in the country, and transform that to a joint forces headquarters with planning and unit command responsibilities. So that means, yes, still under U.S. Indo-PACOM, but that means that there really is a hub now for true integrated planning for deterrence. And I think in that vein, there's also a need for greater planning and consultation about how to fight conventionally, even through an adversary use of nuclear weapons. Ideally, there would also be enhanced trilateral cooperation interesting discussion of that in the last panel, or quadrilateral, right, with Australia as well. So I would have to, I'll just conclude by saying my bottom line is that the future of the alliance, extended deterrence, deterrence writ large, and extended nuclear deterrence, is one of continued evolution. Some poet said, what locks itself in sameness has congealed. Well, we don't want to be a congealed alliance. We're going to have to continue to evolve.
Thank you.
Thank you. Look forward to the discussion.
Thank you. Well done. Kanahara-san.
Yeah, thank you very much. I want to continue our debate here, discussion here. Japan needs a nuclear strategy for the first time. Our liberal international order is now at the crossroads. China and Russia are now eminent challengers to our liberal international order. They do not share the same values as ours. Russia has invaded Ukraine. China wants to take back Taiwan, even with forces. This land was mine before, so I take it back. People belong to me. This is 19th century. We cannot accept it. And the most worrying issue today is the drastically changing Chinese nuclear posture for us. China is now expanding its nuclear arsenal at a great speed. CIA said that in 10 years' time, the number of Chinese nuclear warheads would be about 1,500. The US then would have to face two nuclear peers, Russia and China, at the same time for the first time. There are several questions on the strategic level that must be answered by the United States. Japan, as an ally, wants an answer. First, how can the US cope with the two nuclear superpowers, Russia and China, at the same time? What would the future US nuclear posture, in particular the second strike capabilities, look like? Second, how can the US establish a mutually assured destruction situation with China? Because Chinese nuclear doctrine and operations are so opaque, even totally not transparent. MAD operates with the minimum trust and transparency of the parties involved, like Russia and the United States. It is not yet possible with China. These are the questions that Japan has the right to ask. Japan signed NPT treaty in 1970s because US guaranteed to extend its nuclear umbrella over Japan. Now Japan should ask seriously, maybe for the first time, if this umbrella is real. Any nuclear strategy should be tailored to a specific context and contingency. Japan prepares now for Taiwan contingency. In Taiwan contingency, Japan is a frontal nation and pivotal nation. The US cannot fight in Asia without Japan's bases and its cooperation. The allies are limited. We have no NATO here in Asia. The Philippines is not militarily very strong. Australia is very strong, but is in the southern hemisphere very far. Japan's role is vital to deter China from their military adventurism. In Taiwan contingency, Japan has three options. One, to let the US use the bases in Japan. Two, to cooperate with the US forces in the logistics. Three, to join the war directly. China might be tempted to threat Japan with its nuclear weapons, not to help with the US forces. Unfortunately, Putin proved that the nuclear threat is useful in today's warfare to intimidate the Western nations, not to escalate. Likewise, China may tell Japan to back off. China might even attack the US and Japanese military bases over remote islands or their fleets in the ocean to reduce collateral damage. It would be enough to scare Japanese people off to death. Now the government of Japan must ask, how can the government of Japan reassure Japanese people that China cannot attack Japan with its nuclear weapons in Taiwan contingency? This was a vital question that the late Prime Minister Abe raised publicly sometime before his assassination. If the Japanese government fails to reassure the Japanese people, the credibility of Japan-US alliance would evaporate. The cabinet of the Prime Minister of Japan could collapse, and the Japan could be decoupled from the United States. Then Japan might leave the war of Taiwan. After the contingency, if Taiwan is lost and if China makes its fortress, the Japanese public opinion facing Chinese threats very near to Japan could turn to the idea of possessing its own nuclear arsenal. After MAD is established between the US and China in the future, it is certain that the US and China will never exchange strategic nuclear weapons. But there's no guarantee that China does not attack Japan, an ally and outpost of the United States, with its tactical nuclear weapons. Below the strategic level, Japan and the United States must prepare the effective, flexible responses against any provocations of or attacks from China. Flexibility and readiness are vital to dominate the escalation ladder. We have to dominate the escalation ladder. Only the effective, flexible response could stop China from launching any military provocations or attacks against Japan with nuclear weapons. On Japan's side, the government is trying to establish robust conventional capabilities. Prime Minister Abe decided to introduce a limited number of intermediate-range missiles. Prime Minister Kishida decided to double the defense budget up to 2% of GDP. What is worrying about responsible strategy is the missile gap existing between the United States and China. The US had been bound by INF Treaty until recently, and its intermediate missile capabilities are quite limited. There is no ground-based or sea-based intermediate nuclear missiles in the United States arsenal to be applied in the theater. On the contrary, China has a very large-scale arsenal of intermediate nuclear missiles that can reach Japan in several minutes. When China threatens Japan with its nuclear weapons, the government of Japan must reassure its people that Japan is safe. Japan expects the US to declare that the US will retaliate immediately with all the possible means. To tell the truth, if the deterrent fails, we don't know what would happen. The US response could very well be limited to conventional ones. The US would explain to the government of Japan that militarily it's enough to win the war, and that the US does not want further escalation. And this can very well happen in reality. But Japanese people will feel at that time betrayed, and China will be tempted to decouple Japan psychologically from the US with the nuclear threats then. The Japanese people would fear that peace in Asia would be restored after Japan's destruction by Chinese nuclear weapons. For Japan, deterrence and prevention of the war is preferable, much more preferable, to any type of victory after Japan's destruction. To reassure Japanese people, the use of US tactical weapons must be always among the options of retaliation. To make it sure, Japan should ask the US to redeploy the theater nuclear weapons again. What type of theater nuclear weapons would be the best option for Japan? Japan is not a continental state like Korea, who faces nuclear-armed and huge North Korean army over DMZ. Japan is an island nation with heavy concentration of populations in the coastal area. Deployment of ground-based nuclear missiles on Japan's soil is not a good option. Chinese could attack these bases, and the narrow land will be devastated by radioactive fallouts. Inhabitants around the bases where nuclear missiles could be deployed would oppose to it. Japan should ask the United States to redeploy on the attack submarines intermediate-range nuclear weapons like nuclear tomahawks before. It is now called the
Slickerman.
Yes, sorry, thank you. To show China that their nuclear attack will invite a retaliation of the same kind. For that purpose, Japan should change its 3 non-nuclear principles adopted by Prime Minister Sato in 1960s. Not to possess, not to produce, not to let introduced by the United States nuclear weapons to Japan. We have to change that, not to possess, not to produce, not to let China attack Japan with nuclear weapons. And Japan must admit the protocols of the nuclear-armed attack submarines to Yokosuka and Sasebo. The 3 non-nuclear principles are now harmful to Japanese national security. It hampers deadly the flexibility of U.S. nuclear responses or U.S. nuclear escalation rather. Of course, protocols of these submarines are not enough to make deterrence effective. The government of Japan should show to its people that the decision-making process of nuclear retaliation between Japan and the United States is effective with U.S. nuclear armed submarines. The missiles from China can reach Japan in 5 to 10 minutes. It is far shorter than the case of intercontinental missiles flying over the Arctic. Hypersonic missiles are even faster. How can the leaders of Japan and the United States decide to retaliate immediately after the launch of Chinese nuclear missiles against Japan? Will the Japanese Prime Minister be alive at that time? He can be dead. The government of Japan must show to its people that the U.S. nuclear umbrella is effective and real. And for that purpose, the following 4 points are vital. The first, the close consultations, coordinations of nuclear strategy and tactics between the two leaders of Japan and the United States, both in peacetime and wartime. Second, PACOM, STRATCOM of the United States, and Joint Commanders Headquarters of Japan, to be effective next year, shall develop operational plans of both nuclear and conventional warfare in the specific context of Taiwan contingency. Third, Japan needs to develop more its capabilities to gather intelligence on enemies' nuclear plans and assets. Early warning system shall be strengthened and complement the U.S. early warning system. Lastly, Japanese forces and U.S. forces in Japan must become more resilient to absorb the first Chinese nuclear attacks. It is time for Japan and the United States to discuss openly and seriously about the nuclear strategy in the context of Taiwan contingency. The government of Japan can no longer put its people in the darkness of ignorance of nuclear strategy. The task is daunting, but it is now time to do so. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Karahara-san. So I want to ask each of you, or both of you, 2 questions and then turn to the audience, but I want to draw out things that are in what you were saying. And all this is in the context of a recent change in U.S. deterrence policy, which was announced recently by 2 senior administration officials, which indicates that the Biden administration has accepted that given the growth of the Chinese threat, the United States must be able to deter Russia and China simultaneously. So there's a policy in place. There is an evolving, over 3 administrations, U.S. nuclear modernization program. My question to each of you in turn is, as that program currently stands, do you believe that it is adequate for the future, or are there things that, if you were in charge, you would change? I want to start with you.
So, yes, facing 2 nuclear peers, plus North Korea, plus Iran, it may well be, and I would agree with the Strategic Posture Commission, that the program of record, the one that's been the modernization program that started in the Obama administration and goes on today, is necessary but not sufficient. And in fact, we have made some changes. The SLICM-N, the Sea Launched Cruise Missile Nuclear, is indeed, partly through congressional pressure, is going to be a program. And so it is going forward. It's in its infancy. It'll take 10 years probably to come to fruition, but that is a change that has happened in our programmatics. The B-6113, a variation on the B-61 airdropped bomb, it has also, that's also part of now the program of record. So there have been some changes. And then the question becomes, do we need to change, modify, increase, either by deploying hedge weapons after, either before or after, most people would say after New START ends in February 2026. Should we upload missiles and put more weapons on available for bombers deployed at bases and upload submarines? So that's one way you do it. Another way you can increase some is to tack on to the end of these modernization programs. And that's both for the platforms, the submarines, the ICBMs, the bombers, as well as, and we are also modernizing dual capable aircraft with the F-35, that's well along the way. But there's also the nuclear warhead aspect of that. And we have a nuclear enterprise that is busting to do 5 programs right now, 7 when you add these other 2. And so there is a limit on how fast and how far you can go. But yes, we're going to have to continue this debate in the U.S. and with allies about what do we need for deterrence for the future, for this changing strategic environment. And how much of that needs to be the strategic nuclear triad, how much needs to be in forward deployable weapons, platforms and weapons, what kind, what's best for deterrence. All the variations have pros and cons. There's not a clear, this is the answer. So it's going to take those consultations with allies. What is it that Japan thinks is needed? What does South Korea, what does NATO, what do our allies believe needs to be changed in the future about our program?
Kanahara, do you have a view?
Yeah, now Japan is very much doing its own homework, doubling the defense budgets and acquiring the offensive missiles, these things. But I have to say, in 1991, when Soviet Union collapsed, we said we relaxed very much. Terrorism did not hit Japan very hard. And North Korea is it's a little, but it's a tiny state. It's only these 10 years that we have to face China. China was, when Abe-san took power in 2012, China was our size economically. When Abe left the government, 8 years later, China was US size. And their nuclear arsenal is becoming bigger and bigger and bigger. So this is the first time for us to think about our own fate. During the Cold War, Soviet Union was a formidable enemy, but NATO was there on the other side. They grabbed the jaw of the big bear. And the Americans are ready to launch the nuclear spears across the Arctic. Thousands of nuclear weapons were ready to be shot. So we didn't fear Russians very much. China is very different. It's only us to face Chinese. Koreans, we don't know would they should come or not. Yoon Suk-yeol could join, but Moon Jae-in would never join us. Taiwan has been isolated a long time. It's not covered by formal treaty by the United States. Philippines is US ally. And militarily, they are not very strong. Australia is very strong. It's far away in the south. British, we hope that they could come, but we don't know. There's no NATO here. So we have to think about our deterrence, conventional, nuclear at the same time, in a serious manner. For the first time, we have to do our own homework, conventional, the piling up of our arsenal. But we have to ask tactical nukes, Americans, how would you use that here? There's no debate between Japan and the United States on that. And beyond that, strategic level, as I said, is this okay? Because we heard many rumors that the Colombia new strategic submarines, they are coming to the fleets, but very late.
Late, not very late.
So, not very late. And so the Ohio must be used much longer. This was what we heard several years ago. And B-21, Columbia, and Sentinel, we hear very good stories. Are they ready to face Chinese? Because Chinese arsenal is becoming very big very soon. Can we really cope with them? If we don't have Taiwan issue, we don't fear them, because we have no reason to fight against them. They have nothing to fight against us neither. But we have a real issue with Taiwan here. They may make a mistake like Putin. This is one-man dictatorship, Putin and Xi Jinping. One day morning said, I want a Taiwan. When he says that, the PLA is mobilized. We can't stop them without fighting against them. Yeah. And our concern is we have to do our homework. It's true, conventional sphere. Tactical nuclear weapons, when to use, how to use, what kind of nuclear weapons. We don't know the answer. on the strategic level, are you truly okay?
Yeah.
This is what we think today. So we have to start this kind of discussion seriously between the two leaders.
Well, I think when the modernization program is in full swing, we will be okay. There's going to be a gap. And I think as far as hardware and an extended deterrence, certainly in the NATO context, but also in the Pacific context, we're going to have to be thinking in 4 or 5 years about a standoff weapon for the F-35, because it's as good as it is with the stealth capability. Russian and Chinese air defenses are getting tighter, and so there's going to be a need for a standoff capability. So there is that. You said it's only Taiwan. I worry about Xi Jinping and his greater ambitions to control the South China Sea, but we can talk about that another day. So that's sort of hardware. Let me talk about software and ask you both about this. I'll start with you, Nobuo-san. You both talked about the need for greater cooperation, greater coordination, greater military cooperation, greater political cooperation at the mid-levels, and indeed perhaps at the senior levels. If you were back in government, what would you recommend as the structures necessary to bring the U.S. and Japanese forces closer together in a stronger deterrence framework?
We have now the joint commander for the first time, not the chief staff, joint commander. He will be in place next year. Oops, sorry.
It's me.
The lower level, we are now having maybe thousands of counter-offensive missile capabilities. For the first time, escalation ladder should be decided by both sides. Before, it's totally American job. We have to absorb Chinese missiles, and Americans shoot back. Now we're going to shoot back. So Americans say, don't shoot in the first place. Then we have discussed that between the two. And we have to shoot. We can't shoot the same thing. The division of labor is necessary. Information sharing, intelligence sharing is necessary. This is the lower level of escalation ladder. High up, we know the Stratcom has a large portfolio. They can say which one would you like, the ICBM or Trident or Sentinel. But the truth is, in the PACOM, they are in charge of operations in conventional sphere. And Stratcom is in charge of these nuclear missiles. But truth is, we are always talking to Indo-PACOM. We never talked about introducing nuclear dimension in the Taiwan contingency. So we have to think of now how to combine this conventional planning and nuclear planning together between the two supreme commanders. And this is one. And two, we have to think of our leaders' decision-making process. Because when the President Biden calls the Prime Minister of Japan, he can be dead. 5 minutes after the launch of missiles from Chirin in Manchuria, we can be dead in Tokyo. Then who should be in charge? And we should show to Chinese that we are ready to shoot back. It doesn't matter whether you truly shoot back the nukes or not, conventional. But we have to show to Chinese that they can be retaliated by the same kind of missiles. We have to show that to them. But if China thinks that the leader of Japan can be dead very easily, and there's no communication lines between US and Japan, and there's no true operational plan between Stratcom and Japanese forces, they say, we can do that. So we have to be ready to truly make decisions to engage nuclear dimension in Taiwan contingency. And we have to start talking about it.
Anything would you like to add?
I would totally agree. It's all these various, there's deconfliction, there's coordination, and there's integration. And that's kind of a range of things you can do together. And the intelligence is important, the conventional deconflicting and hopefully coordinating conventional strike would be very important. And knowing, it's not just that if a war comes, we can do it. It's showing, as you say, showing China that we are together in this and that we are integrated, and it will not just be one country. There are multiple countries involved here, and so having them understand that we're doing those things, not the details, but having them understand that the fact of our doing it, I think is also important.
And because we're talking about combined military operations here with at least two countries and maybe more, it's going to be absolutely crucial to install the unity of command principle, which is without which you can't have effective military operations. Well, you've heard our experts. I can probably take a couple of questions. So would anybody like to ask a question? Or have we overawed you this afternoon?
Or made your eyes glaze over.
If you want to ask a question, would you please just stand up and someone will bring you a microphone? Yes, in the back.
Hi, I'm Carlo. I'm a student at CSIS. I'm from the Philippines, so I was actually interested in the discussion about like the capabilities of the Philippines. Like it's a strong ally, but it's weak. I'd like to ask, like, I know the discussion is mostly focused on U.S.-Japan relations, but like given this entire thing, do you think it's a good idea to somewhat incentivize other allies, especially like the weaker ones, like the Philippines, to build up its own capabilities and somewhat join in and like bring themselves up to the level? Do you think like it should be like an actively done, like there should be some support from the Japanese or from the Americans, or do you think they should just, like the Philippines should just be allowed to do whatever it wants to do given its abilities now? Or, yeah.
I think coordination with allies, and Philippines, this is an interesting place because relations were here and then they went here and now they're back. So it's an interesting case study. But I do think that with any ally, you need to think about what they're doing for themselves, what they can and are doing for themselves, what we do together. And by together, I don't just mean military operations or exercises, but also what kind of defense arms cooperation we have, that sort of thing. So what we're going to do together, and then what they're going to rely on the U.S. for. It's as I understand it, that's a renewed conversation in progress.
Yeah, if you read the Article 6 of Japan-U.S. Security Treaty, it's written in this way: the United States can use Japanese bases to defend not only Japan but Korea, Taiwan, and the Philippines. And since the beginning of Japan-U.S. alliance, Philippines is a part of Japan's defense program. The truth is, during the Cold War, only Russia was our enemy. China was on our side. Defending Taiwan, defending Philippines are not on our table. But now we have to face China. Unfortunately, if China attacks Taiwan, they want to attack Japan and Philippines at the same time. So we have frontal nations, Taiwan and Japan and the Philippines. That's the reason why Kishida-san with President Biden, with President Marcos are meeting to talk about this. This is for the first time, but we're now talking about defending Taiwan, but not only Taiwan, but defending Philippines. We have to do that. It's only us, United States, Japan, Taiwan, and the Philippines, possibly Australia. Now, this is very first time to do this, but we have to do that.
Thank you. Others? Anyone else? Okay. So we've talked you all out. It's almost time. I'm going to thank you for coming. I want you to thank our two speakers, and we'll call it a day. Thank you.